The velvet curtains part with a whisper, revealing the darkened stage beyond. As I step forward, the floorboards creak beneath my feet, an eerie echo in the empty theater. My heart pounds, each beat reverberating through my chest as if amplified by the cavernous space around me. I pause at center stage, willing my trembling legs to stay steady. It's been 2 years since I last stood in this spot. 2 years since the night that shattered my world and left me a broken shell of the man I once was. The memories flood back unbidden, as vivid and horrifying as the moment they were seared into my mind. I close my eyes, fighting back the images, but they come anyway. A tide of terror that threatens to drown me. The roar of the crowd, the heat of the stage lights beating down, my voice ringing out clear and strong as I delivered my lines. It was opening night of our revival of The Phantom of the Opera, and everything was going perfectly. The audience was captivated. The cast was in top form. I felt invincible, riding high on the rush of a flawless performance. Then came the fateful moment. The grand chandelier crash, a pinnacle of theatrical spectacle. It never failed to elicit gasps of awe from the crowd. The massive prop was rigged to plummet from the ceiling in a shower of shattering crystal, stopping just short of the stage in a stunning illusion of destruction. But on that night, something went terribly wrong. I heard it first, a deep groan of straining metal, audible even over the swelling orchestra. My eyes darted upward, widening in horror as I saw the chandelier swaying ominously. In that split second, I knew with sickening certainty that this was no illusion. Time seemed to slow as I watched death descend from above. The chandelier tore free from its moorings in an explosion of splintering wood and snapping cables. It plunged toward the crowd below, a glittering harbinger of doom. I opened my mouth to scream a warning, but no sound emerged. I was frozen, helpless, as 2 tons of metal and crystal crashed into the packed theater seats. The cacophony was deafening, shattering glass, splintering wood, and the agonized screams of the audience all blending into a hellish symphony. Chaos erupted as people scrambled to escape, trampling those who had fallen in their desperation to flee. I stood, rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes from the nightmare scene unfolding before me. The front rows had been obliterated, seats crushed to kindling beneath the chandelier's bulk. Those who hadn't been killed instantly writhed in agony, impaled by shards of crystal or pinned beneath twisted metal. Blood ran in rivulets down the sloped floor, pooling at the foot of the stage. The coppery scent of it filled my nostrils so strong I could taste it on my tongue. Still, I couldn't move, couldn't even blink, as I stared in slack-jawed horror. A child's plaintive wail cut through the din, snapping me out of my daze. Without conscious thought, I leapt from the stage and waded into the carnage. I pulled people from the wreckage with full strength born of desperation, heedless of the glass that sliced my palms to ribbons. For hours, I worked alongside rescue crews, digging through the rubble for survivors. But as the night wore on, we found fewer living and more dead. By dawn, the death toll had climbed to 37, with scores more injured. I emerged from the theater, as the first rays of sunlight painted the sky, clothes soaked with blood, both my own and others. My throat was raw from shouting, my body battered and aching, but the physical pain paled in comparison to the anguish that gripped my soul. In the days that followed, I learned the gruesome details. A faulty weld had given way, sending the chandelier plummeting with lethal force. It was a freak accident, they said. No one was to blame. But I knew better. I was to blame. I had been the star, the one whose name drew crowds to the theater night after night. If not for me, those people would never have been there. Their blood was on my hands. The nightmares began almost immediately. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back on that stage, watching helplessly as death rained down. I relived the horror again and again, waking in a cold sweat with the victim's screams echoing in my ears. Sleep became my enemy. I would go days without rest, fueled by a cocktail of caffeine and desperation. When my exhaustion finally claimed me, the dreams were there waiting. Sometimes I was crushed beneath the chandelier myself, feeling my bones splinter as the weight pressed down. Other times, I was trapped in the audience, unable to escape as the crystal shards sliced into me. But the worst dreams were the ones where I saved them, where I found the voice to shout a warning, or the strength to catch the chandelier before it fell. For in those blissful moments between sleep and waking, I believed it had all been just a bad dream. The crushing return to reality was almost more than I could bear. I withdrew from the world, sequestering myself in my apartment. The very thought of stepping onto a stage again filled me with paralyzing terror. I ignored calls from my agent, from casting directors eager to capitalize on the notorious tragedy. The newspapers dubbed me the Phantom's Savior, and I was suddenly more famous than ever. The irony was not lost on me. Reporters camped outside my building, hungry for an exclusive with the reclusive star. I became a prisoner in my own home, afraid to so much as open the curtains lest I catch a glimpse of the outside world. Food deliveries piled up outside my door. I couldn't bear to even face the delivery drivers. In my isolation, I began to see things, shadows that moved when they shouldn't, flickering shapes in my peripheral vision. I told myself it was just fatigue, just my mind playing tricks. But in the dark watches of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It started small at first, items not where I had left them, the faint sound of whispers when no one was there, a chill in the air even in the heat of summer. I might have dismissed it as signs of my deteriorating mental state, if not for what came next. I awoke one night to find my bedroom filled with a soft, ethereal glow. As my eyes adjusted, I saw them, translucent figures scattered about the room. Men, women, children, all bearing gruesome injuries of that fatal night. They stared at me with hollow eyes, their faces masks of accusation and sorrow. I scrambled back against the headboard, a scream lodged in my throat. This was a dream. It had to be. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up. But when I opened them again, the spirits remained. One by one, they approached the bed. Spectral hands reached for me, icy fingers brushing my skin. Their touch sent jolts of agony through my body, the pain of crushed limbs, of impalement, of slow suffocation. Every hurt they had suffered, I felt it as if it were my own. I begged for mercy, pleaded for forgiveness, but they were beyond such things now. They had come with a singular purpose, to ensure I never forgot the lives that had been lost, that I never escaped the guilt which was my due. Night after night they came, tormenting me with visions of their final moments. I saw through their eyes as the chandelier fell, felt their terror and pain as death claimed them. Their memories became my own, 100 different perspectives of the same horrific event. I was the mother who shielded her child with her own body, her back shredded by shrapnel. I was the elderly man, pinned beneath a seat, slowly crushed as the crowd stampeded above him. I was the young woman who bled out in the aisle, a shard of crystal lodged in her throat. During the day, I was haunted by phantom pains, legacies of injuries I had never actually sustained. My back ached constantly, bearing the phantom weight of the chandelier. My hands throbbed where glass had sliced them open, though the skin remained unmarked. I began to long for death, for an end to the relentless torment, but the spirits would not allow it. Twice, I tried to end my own life, only to have the pills knocked from my hand or the razor pulled from my grasp by unseen forces. They were not finished with me yet. Months passed in a haze of misery and guilt. I wasted away, eating barely enough to stay alive. When I caught sight of myself in the mirror, I hardly recognized the gaunt, wild-eyed creature staring back at me. I looked more like a corpse than the spirits that haunted me. It was in my darkest hour, hovering on the brink of madness, that an unexpected lifeline appeared. A letter slipped under my door, bearing a logo of the theater where tragedy had struck. I nearly burned it unread, but something stayed my hand. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the heavy parchment. It was an invitation. The theater was reopening after extensive renovations, and they wanted me to headline the grand revival. My blood ran cold at the very thought. I crumpled the letter, hurling it across the room. How dare they? How could they expect me to set foot on that stage again, much less perform? It was unthinkable. But as the days passed, I found my thoughts returning to the invitation. The theater had been my home, the stage my refuge. For all the pain associated with that place now, I couldn't deny the pull it still held on my heart. And so, against all reason, I found myself considering it. Perhaps, I thought, this was the key to my redemption, a chance to face my demons and lay them to rest at last. Or perhaps it was simply that I had nothing left to lose. With shaking hands, I penned my reply. I would return to the stage one final time. The news of my imminent return sent shockwaves through the theater world. Some hailed it as a triumphant comeback, the conquering of tragedy by the human spirit. Others decried it as a tasteless publicity stunt, capitalizing on the deaths of innocents. My focus was consumed entirely by preparation for the performance, and by the growing dread that threatened to overwhelm me. The hauntings intensified as the date drew nearer. The spirits were ever present now, their accusatory gazes following my every move. They whispered incessantly, a constant chorus of laments and recriminations that threatened to drive me mad. Still, I persevered. I threw myself into rehearsals with a fervor that bordered on obsession. I would make this the perfect performance, I vowed. I owed it to the victims, that much at least. The theater had been entirely rebuilt, every trace of the tragedy erased, but I could still see it as it had been that night. The splintered seats, the blood-stained floors. Every time I set foot in the building, the memories crashed over me anew. My castmates regarded me with a mixture of pity and unease. They had all heard the rumors of my breakdown, my descent into isolation and madness. I caught them whispering when they thought I couldn't hear, placing bets on whether I would make it to opening night. I ignored them all, losing myself in the role. I had chosen to perform Macbeth, a tale of guilt and madness that felt all too fitting. As I delved deeper into the character, I found the line between actor and role beginning to blur. Like Macbeth, I was haunted by the ghosts of those I had wronged. Like him, I was driven to the brink of sanity by the weight of my crimes, and like him, I knew that my fate was sealed. There could be no redemption for what I had done. The night before the performance, I knelt before the spirits that haunted me. I begged them for the strength to make it through one last show. Whether they granted my request or simply decided to reserve their torments, I slept peacefully for the first time in 2 years. I awoke on the morning of the performance, filled with a strange calm. Whatever happened tonight, it would all be over soon. One way or another, I would find release from my torment. As I entered the theater, a hush fell over the assembled cast and crew. All eyes were on me, watching for any sign of the fragility they all knew lurked beneath the surface. I met their gazes steadily, allowing none of my inner turmoil to show. The hours ticked by with agonizing slowness. I paced in my dressing room, running lines under my breath as I had 1,000 times before. But try as I might, I couldn't banish the feeling of impending doom that pressed down upon me. At last, that call came. Places in 5 minutes. I took a deep, shuddering breath and looked at myself in the mirror one last time. The face that stared back was a mask of determination, all trace of fear carefully hidden away. I was ready. I made my way to the wings, heart pounding in my chest. As I waited for my cue, I became aware of a presence beside me. I turned to see a shimmering figure, one of my ghostly tormentors. But there was no malice in its eyes now, only a deep sadness. It reached out, spectral fingers brushing my cheek in a gesture almost like benediction, and then it was gone, leaving only a lingering chill against my skin. The curtain rose. I stepped out onto the stage. The bright lights blinded me for a moment, and in that instant, I was transported back to that fateful night. I could hear the groaning of metal, see the chandelier beginning to fall, but I forced the memories away, grounding myself in the present. This was not that night. I was here to perform, to honor those who had been lost. I would not let fear defeat me now. I opened my mouth and began to speak, my voice ringing out clear and strong. The familiar words flowed from me, and I felt myself slipping into the role as I had so many times before. But as the play progressed, I became aware of a strange energy building in the theater. The air seemed to thicken, charged with an otherworldly presence. My skin prickled with goosebumps, though I was sweating beneath the hot stage lights. I faltered for a moment, words catching in my throat. And in that instant of silence, I heard it. A faint, whispering, audible even over the ambient noise of the crowd. My blood ran cold as I recognized the voices of the dead. They were all around me now, filling the stage with their ethereal forms. They moved through the other actors, who seemed oblivious to their presence. But I could see them clearly, could feel their eyes upon me. My lines became a litany of apology, the anguish in my voice bleeding through the other characters' words. Tears streamed down my face as I poured out my guilt and my remorse to the unhearing audience. The other actors exchanged worried glances, clearly unsure how to react to my unscripted emotion. But I was beyond caring about their confusion. My entire world had narrowed to this moment, this chance to unburden my soul at last. As I spoke the final lines of the play, my voice broke. I fell to my knees, overcome by the weight of it all. The theater felt silent, the audience holding its collective breath. In that moment of hushed anticipation, I felt a shift in the air. The oppressive presence that haunted me for so long began to lift. One by one, the spirits faded from view. Their whispers grew fainter, until at last, I heard only silence. I raised my head, scarcely daring to hope. The stage was empty now. Save for my bewildered castmates, the spirits were gone. But had they truly departed, or were they simply biding their time? As the curtain fell, I remained on my knees, trembling with exhaustion and relief. I had done it. I had faced my fears and emerged, if not victorious, then at least still standing. But even as a fragile sense of peace settled over me, a nagging doubt remained. Was this truly the end of my torment, or merely the eye of the storm, a brief respite before fresh horrors were visited upon me? I pushed myself to my feet on shaking legs, making my way slowly toward the wings. Whatever came next, I would face it. For I had learned that there are fates far worse than death, and I had already survived them. As I stepped off that stage, the theater erupted in a thunderous applause, but I barely heard it. My mind was already racing ahead, wondering what new trials awaited me in the days to come. The roar of applause faded as I stumbled into the wings, my body trembling with a potent mixture of adrenaline and dread. The other actors crowded around me, their faces a blur of concern and confusion. Their words washed over me in an incomprehensible tide, drowned out by the pounding of my own heart. I pushed past them, desperate for solitude. My dressing room beckoned, a sanctuary from the chaos of the theater. As I fumbled with the doorknob, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished brass. The face that stared back was haggard, eyes wild, with a combination of triumph and terror. The door clicked shut behind me, muffling the sounds of the world outside. I slumped into my chair, letting out a shuddering breath. The room felt different somehow, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. But the absence of the spirit's oppressive presence only made me more acutely aware of the void they had left behind. For 2 years, they had been my constant companions. Their torment had become a twisted form of comfort, a penance for my perceived sins. Now, in their absence, I felt adrift, lost. A soft knock at the door jolted me from my reverie.
5 minutes to curtain call, Mr. Holloway,
came the stage manager's muffled voice. Curtain call. The thought of facing the audience again sent a fresh wave of panic through me. How could I go back out there? Take a bow as if this were just another performance, as if the stage weren't stained with the blood of the innocent. My hands shook as I straightened my costume, smoothed the back of my sweat-dampened hair. I had to do this. I owed it to the victims, to their families, to myself. The walk back to the stage felt like a death march. Each step was an effort, my legs laden with exhaustion and fear. As I neared the wings, the applause swelled once more, punctuated by shouts and whistles. I paused at the edge of the curtain, heart racing. What if this was all an illusion? What if I stepped out onto the stage and saw not an adoring crowd, but the mangled bodies of those who had died on that fateful night? A gentle pressure on my shoulder made me flinch. I turned to find the lead actress, Sarah. I remembered dimly, looking at me with a mixture of concern and admiration. "That was incredible," she said softly. "I've never seen anything like it. Are you okay?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. How could I explain the torment of the past 2 years, the spectral visitations, the crushing guilt? How could anyone understand? Sarah seemed to sense my struggle. She squeezed my shoulder gently, offering a small smile. "You don't have to explain. Just know that you're not alone, okay? We're all here for you." Her kindness nearly undid me. Tears pricked at my eyes. I had to look away. With a deep breath, I steeled myself and stepped out onto the stage. The bright lights blinded me momentarily, and in that instant of darkness, panic clawed at my throat. But as my vision cleared, I saw only a sea of faces, living faces, their expressions a mix of awe and excitement. The applause was deafening. As I took my bow, I scanned the crowd, half expecting to see accusatory spectral faces among the living, but there were none. For the first time in 2 years, I was truly alone in my own mind. As I straightened, my eyes were drawn to a figure in the front row, an elderly woman, her face lined with grief, but her eyes shining with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Recognition hit me like a physical blow. I had seen her before, in the memories forced upon me by the spirits. She was the mother of one of the victims. Our gazes locked, and in that moment, a wordless understanding passed between us. I saw forgiveness in her eyes, a release from the guilt that had consumed me for so long. A single tear slid down her cheek as she nodded almost imperceptibly. The weight that lifted from my shoulders in that instant was almost palpable. I felt lighter, freer than I had in years. As I left the stage for the final time, a fragile hope began to bloom in my chest. Perhaps, just perhaps, redemption was possible after all. But as I returned to my dressing room, doubt began to creep back in. The spirits were gone, yes, but for how long? Was this truly a new beginning, or merely a brief respite before fresh torments began? I sank into the small sofa, my mind racing. The performance was over, but I knew the real challenge was just beginning. How would I face the world outside these walls? How could I begin to rebuild a life that had been shattered so completely? A soft knock at the door interrupted my spiraling thoughts.
Mr. Holloway?
It was the theater manager, his voice tentative.
There are some people here to see you, family members of the victims. They'd like to speak with you, if you're willing.
My breath caught in my throat. Part of me wanted to refuse, to hide away in this room forever. But I knew I couldn't. I owed them this much at least. "Send them in," I called, my voice barely above a whisper. As the door opened, I steeled myself for accusations, for anger and grief. But the faces that greeted me held none of that. Instead, I saw compassion, understanding, and a shared sorrow that cut me to my core. They filed in silently, a dozen or so people, of all ages. I recognized some from the spirit memories that had plagued me. Others were strangers. But the pain in their eyes was all too familiar. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then an older man stepped forward, his hand outstretched. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for remembering them." I took his hand, my own trembling. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, the words woefully inadequate. "I never meant—" He cut me off with a gentle squeeze of my hand. "We know. We don't blame you. None of us do." One by one, they approached. Some spoke, sharing memories of their lost loved ones. Others simply clasped my hand or embraced me, their touch a balm to my battered soul. As they spoke, I began to see the victims not as the broken, accusing specters that had haunted me, but as the vibrant individuals they had been in life. Their families painted pictures of dreams unrealized, of loves and passions and quirks that made them uniquely human. For the first time, I truly mourned them, not from a place of guilt, but from a genuine sense of loss for the lives cut short. I wept openly, my tears mingling with those of the families. When the last of them had spoken, a profound silence fell over the room. The air felt charged, as if on the cusp of something momentous. I looked around at these people who had every reason to hate me, yet had chosen forgiveness instead. "I want to do something," I said, my voice hoarse from crying. "To honor them, to ensure they're never forgotten. I don't know what, but I want to help, if you'll let me." The responses were immediate and overwhelming. Ideas were shared. Plans begun to take shape. A scholarship fund for aspiring actors. A safety initiative for theaters across the country. A memorial to be built in the lobby. As we talked, I felt something stirring within me. A sense of purpose I had thought lost forever. The road ahead would not be easy, I knew. The guilt and trauma of the past 2 years would not vanish overnight. But for the first time since that fateful night, I dared to hope for the future. When the last of the families had gone, I sat alone in my dressing room, emotionally drained. emotionally drained, but strangely at peace. The mirror caught my eye. I saw a flicker of movement in its reflection. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought the spirits had returned. But as I turned, I only saw empty air. The chill that had been my constant companion for 2 years was gone, replaced by a warmth that seemed to radiate from within. I gathered my things slowly, savoring the quiet. As I reached for the doorknob, I hesitated. Beyond this room lay a world I had hidden from for so long, a world that now seemed both terrifying and full of possibility. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door and stepped out into the unknown. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them, for the sake of those who had been lost, and for my own salvation. I would find a way to go on. As I walked through the darkened theater, I could almost hear a whisper of phantom applause. But this time, it didn't fill me with dread. Instead, I felt a bittersweet sense of farewell and of a new beginning. The stage door loomed before me, a portal between worlds. I pushed it open, letting the cool night air wash over me. The city stretched out beyond, a tapestry of lights and shadows. Somewhere out there lay my future, uncertain, daunting, but alive with potential. I took my first step into the night, leaving the theater behind. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was not truly an ending. The spirits may have gone, but their memory lingered. And in that memory lay both a burden and a gift, a chance to honor the dead by truly living. The street was quiet, the late hour keeping most people indoors. But as I walked, I became aware of a presence beside me. Not the oppressive, accusing presence of the spirits, but something gentler, a companion on the journey ahead. I glanced to my side, half expecting to see a ghostly figure, but there was only empty air. Yet, the feeling persisted, a sense that I was not truly alone, that those who had been lost were with me still, not as tormentors, but as silent guardians. The realization brought a small smile to my lips. Perhaps that was the true nature of ghosts, not vengeful spirits, but the inedible marks left on our souls by those we've lost. The memories that shape us, haunt us, and ultimately guide us toward redemption. As I walked on into the night, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but I was ready to face it. For in facing my fears, I had found a strength I never knew I possessed. The city stretched out before me, a world of infinite possibilities, and somewhere in the distance, I could almost hear faint strains of music. Not the ominous chords of that fateful night, but a gentler melody. A song of hope, of healing, of new beginnings. I quickened my pace, eager to see what the future held. The ghosts of my past walked beside me, no longer accusers, but allies in the journey ahead. Together, we stepped into the unknown, ready to write the next act in this strange and haunting play. The night enveloped me, cool and welcoming. As I walked on, I felt the weight of the past 2 years beginning to lift. With each step, I moved further from the man I had been and closer to the man I would become. The theater faded into the distance behind me, but its lessons remained. I had learned the power of facing one's fears, of confronting the ghosts that haunt us, and I discovered that even in the darkest of tragedies, there is the potential for redemption. As I reached the end of the block, I paused at the crossroads. In every direction lay a different path, a different future. The choice was mine to make. For a moment, I stood frozen, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the decision before me. Then, taking a deep breath, I chose a direction and began to walk. Where this path would lead, I couldn't say, but for the first time in years, I looked forward to finding out. The city swallowed me up, its rhythm becoming my own. As I walked into the night, I felt the first stirrings of something I thought lost forever: hope. The ghosts of the past would always be with me, I knew. But now, instead of dragging me down, they lifted me up. Their memory would be my guide. Their lost potential, my inspiration. With each step, I moved further from the haunted theater and closer to an uncertain but promising future. The night stretched out before me, full of shadows and light, challenges and opportunities, and I walked on, ready to face whatever lay ahead. As I ventured deeper into the city, the familiar streets began to take on an unsettling quality. The flickering streetlights cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and twist with a life of their own. A fog rolled in, thick and unnatural, muffling the sounds of the night and obscuring my vision. I quickened my pace, a sense of unease growing with each step. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what. The city I had known all my life suddenly felt alien, as if I had stumbled into some parallel version of reality. A figure emerged from the mist ahead, their silhouette vaguely familiar. As I drew closer, my breath caught in my throat. It was Sarah, my co-star from the play, but something was off about her appearance. Her skin was too pale, her movements too fluid. "Sarah," I called out hesitantly. "What are you doing here?" She turned to face me, and I recoiled in horror. Her eyes were hollow sockets, dark and empty. When she spoke, her voice was a rasping whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Did you really think it would be that easy, Thomas? That you could simply walk away and leave it all behind?" I stumbled backward, my heart racing. This couldn't be happening. The spirits were gone. I had been freed, hadn't I? More figures emerged from the fog, each one a grotesque parody of someone I knew. My director, his head lolling at an unnatural angle. The theater manager, his chest a gaping wound. And behind them, a growing crowd of faceless specters. "No," I whispered, shaking my head in denial. "This isn't real. You're gone. I saw you leave." A cruel laugh echoed through the air, seeming to come from the fog itself. "Oh, Thomas, so naive. Did you truly believe a single performance could atone for what happened? That you could wash away the blood on your hands so easily?" I turned to run, but the fog had thickened behind me, forming an impenetrable wall. I was trapped, surrounded by the accusing stares of the dead. "Please," I begged, falling to my knees. "I've suffered. I've paid for what happened. What more do you want from me? The spectral Sarah knelt before me, her eyeless gaze boring into my soul. We want the truth, Thomas. The truth you've been hiding even from yourself. What truth? I asked, my voice trembling. I've hidden nothing. I've laid my soul bare, faced my guilt. Not your guilt, she hissed. Your complicity. The word hit me like a physical blow. Complicity? I don't understand. It was an accident, a tragedy. Was it? The voice came from behind me now, and I whirled to find myself face to face with a new apparition. My blood ran cold as I recognized him. The theater's former head of maintenance, who had disappeared shortly after the accident. You knew, didn't you, Thomas? He accused. You knew the chandelier was faulty. I warned you, begged you to cancel the show until it could be fixed properly, but you couldn't bear to disappoint your adoring fans, could you? To miss out on your moment of glory. No, I whispered. But even as I denied it, long-buried memories began to surface. A hurried conversation backstage, brushed aside in the excitement of opening night. A nagging worry, silenced by the siren call of applause. I didn't think. I never imagined. Of course you didn't, Sarah's specter sneered. Because you didn't want to. It was easier for you to ignore the risk, to tell yourself it would be fine. And when it all went wrong, you hid behind your grief and guilt, painting yourself as a victim rather than face the truth of your own culpability. The truth of her words crashed over me like a tidal wave. I saw it all now. The willful blindness that led to tragedy, the selfish desire for acclaim that had overridden caution and common sense. Oh God, I moaned, doubling over as the full weight of my actions hit me. What have I done? The fog swirled around me, images flickering through its depths. I saw myself dismissing the maintenance head's concerns, assuring him that it would hold for one more night. I saw the doubt in his eyes, the resignation as he walked away. He tried to stop it, you know, the spectral Sarah said softly. Climbed up there himself to try and secure the chandelier. He was still up there when it fell. Fresh horror washed over me as I realized the full extent of the tragedy. Not just an accident, but a preventable disaster. I had been the one to set it in motion. What happens now? I asked, my voice hollow. Is this my punishment? To be haunted for eternity by the knowledge of what I've done? The spirits exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Then Sarah spoke again, her voice softer now, almost pitying. That would be the easy way out, wouldn't it? To succumb to madness, to lose yourself in guilt and regret. But that's not why we're here, Thomas. I looked up, confused. Then why? Why show me this? Why make me remember? Because it's time for you to truly atone, she replied. Not with grand gestures or public performances, but with the quiet, thankless work of making amends. The fog began to thin, the spectral figures fading. As they disappeared, I felt a weight settle onto my shoulders. Not the crushing burden of before, but a solemn responsibility. Find them, Sarah's fading voice whispered. find the families of those who died. Not just the ones who came to you, but all of them. Learn their stories. Help them heal. And most importantly, make sure this never happens again. As the last of the fog dissipated, I found myself alone on the streets once more. But everything had changed. The city around me was the same, and yet utterly transformed by the weight of this new knowledge. I stood slowly, my legs shaky but my resolve firm. I knew what I had to do now, the path I had to walk. It would not be easy, and it would likely take the rest of my life, but it was the only way to truly honor those who had been lost. As I began to walk once more, I felt a shift in the air around me. The oppressive presence of the spirits was gone, replaced by something softer, almost guiding. I realized that this had been their purpose all along, not to torment me, but to lead me to this moment of truth and revelation. The next few months were a blur of activity. I threw myself into research, tracking down every family affected by the tragedy. Many slammed doors in my face. Others greeted me with anger and accusations. But slowly, painfully, I began to make progress. I listened to their stories, shouldered their grief and anger. I used my connections in the theater world to find jobs for those struggling financially, set up counseling services for those grappling with trauma. And with each small act, each life touched, I felt a tiny fraction of the weight lift from my soul. But I knew it wasn't enough. The true test came when I approached the theater owners with a proposal, a complete overhaul of safety regulations, not just for our theater, but for every stage in the city. It would be costly, time-consuming, and would likely end my career as an actor. But I knew it was necessary. To my surprise, they agreed. Perhaps they had been carrying the weight of unacknowledged guilt, or perhaps they simply recognized the necessity of change. Whatever the reason, we set to work. Years passed. I aged, my once handsome face lined with marks of stress and hard work. But with each passing day, each small victory, I felt myself growing lighter. The nightmares faded, replaced by dreams of stages made safe, of lives protected. It wasn't until the 10th anniversary of the tragedy that I set foot on a stage again. Not as an actor, but as a speaker at a memorial service. As I stood before the crowd, I saw faces I recognized, family members of the victims, fellow actors, theater workers, all united in remembrance and in hope for a safer future. I spoke of loss, of guilt, of the long road to redemption. But more than that, I spoke of change, of the strides we made in theater safety, of lives saved by new regulations and procedures. As I talked, I felt a presence around me. Not oppressive or accusatory, but supportive. The spirits of those we had lost, I realized, watching over us all. As I concluded my speech, a hush fell over the crowd. Then slowly, a sound began to build. Not applause, but something more profound, a collective exhalation, as if a great burden had been lifted from all of us. I stepped down from the podium, my heart full. As I made my way through the crowd, I was stopped by a familiar face. The elderly woman from the front row of the last performance. The mother of one of the victims. "Thank you," she said softly, taking my hand in hers. "Not just for this, but for everything you've done. My daughter. I think she would be proud." Tears pricked at my eyes, but for the first time in years, they were not tears of guilt or sorrow. As I embraced the woman, I felt a shift in the air around us. The last lingering traces of spectral presence faded away, their purpose finally fulfilled. That night, as I walked home through the city streets, I felt truly at peace for the first time in a decade. The weight I had carried for so long was not gone. I knew it would never be entirely, but it had transformed from a crushing burden into a gentle reminder of responsibility we all share to look out for one another. As I reached my apartment, I paused at the threshold. The ghost of my former self seemed to linger there. The man I had been before that fateful night, full of ambition and self-importance. I nodded to him, acknowledging the journey that had brought me to this point. Then I stepped inside, closing the door on the past and opening myself to whatever the future might hold. The stage of my life had been reset, the tragedy rewritten into a story of redemption and growth. And though I knew there would be more acts to come, more challenges to face, I was ready to face them. For I had learned the most important lesson of all, that our greatest roles are not the ones we play for an audience, but for the ones we live every day. And in that ongoing performance, every one of us has the power to change the script, to rewrite tragedy into hope. As I settled into my chair, a sense of calm washed over me. The haunting was over, but its lessons would stay with me always. And in the quiet of the night, I could almost hear a faint echo of applause. Not for the actor I had been, but for the man I had become. The curtain had fallen on one chapter of my life, but I knew the true performance was just beginning. And this time, I was determined to make it one worthy of a standing ovation.